Hi, we are live and we are starting a hangout on basic beliefs because Helena actually brought it up and I had invited Helena, but she has not shown yet. So we have, Hypatia in here, we got Max, we got Odian, we got Ozzy, and we got Rumpus. But still waiting for Helena, but we're going to start without her because that's just what we do around here. But yesterday we had a nice discussion with Wyatt. He had a very decent presentation on presuppositionalism. He did a lot better than he did last time, I thought. Did you guys watch that? Do around here. Yesterday we had a nice discussion with Wyatt. I'm getting a feedback on myself. Did you guys watch Wyatt's yesterday?
I didn't get a chance to, no.
Yeah, no, he did a lot better than usual. But anyways, Ozzy wanted to kind of go over his little spiel with properly basic beliefs too. So I'm going to fix this echo while I turn it over to him and adjust my gain over here. And he's going to go over properly basic beliefs to see if he can clear up some of the confusion that people have had on him.
Okay, you're just handing this over to me like this? Okay.
Oh, yours. Yeah, I got to adjust this. I got to adjust something.
Okay. Well, I started talking about properly basic beliefs in the context of the Great Debate in some of my videos a couple of years ago, and it's a concept that I am partial to. I'm not someone who thinks I'm an atheist. For those people who don't know me, I'm an atheist, but I'm not one of those atheists who would identify as an epistemist or something like that. Someone who thinks that all of his or her beliefs can be grounded in evidence. I think that at the bottom of all our beliefs, at the very bottom of rationality itself, are faith commitments. Now, I know faith is a dirty word to a lot of atheists, but I think that's a mistake. All I mean by faith in this context are beliefs that are unwarranted. And I think that there are beliefs that we all share that rest on other beliefs. Rather, I think there are beliefs that we all share, on which the rest of our beliefs depend. And those very basic beliefs, some of them can't be defended, but they're integral to the rest of our worldview. And they're so tied into everything else and tied into the very way that we think and reason that they stand apart as a class unto themselves. So not every basic belief, not every belief that is basic and fundamental to your worldview is properly basic. So the reason we're having this hangout is because Helena Handbasket wanted me to say a few words about what makes certain beliefs properly basic. Okay, well, what's a basic belief? Well, different philosophers view this differently. I mean, one way to think of a basic belief is a belief that's non-inferential. You just sort of have this belief. You didn't infer it. You didn't learn it. You didn't acquire it. I think that's something like that is right. Another way of understanding a basic belief is it's just a belief that's sort of at the rock bottom of your entire belief set, and whether or not you can justify it. And some people think that they have certain beliefs at the very bottom of their belief set that are self-evident. You'll hear this expression, self-evident, or given in experience. There's some beliefs that are just given in experience, or they're self-evident, and consequently you can never deny them. And they think that they can build up on that foundation the entire edifice of the rest of their belief set. So that's sort of what a basic belief is. Okay, it's kind of a first-order, primary set of beliefs. Those are basic beliefs, as opposed to beliefs that you acquire later on the basis of other assumptions. Okay, in the Great Debate we also hear an awful lot about presuppositions. There are things that we presuppose, things that we just assume to be true. Okay, some of those I think are going to be basic beliefs. Okay? But what are properly basic beliefs? Well, I think properly basic beliefs, as I understand them, and this is my own gloss on them, is I have sort of 5 criteria that I would use. One is that they're all unstated assumptions. Okay, for a belief to not just be basic, just an important belief in your belief set, like a belief in God, for instance, I think is basic, but I don't think it's properly basic. For a belief to be properly basic, it has to be it starts off as an unstated assumption. Okay, you can become aware of it or made aware of it through reflection and introspection, but you didn't have to be taught it. You didn't have to learn it. Okay, so think about trusting your senses. Okay, trusting the evidence of your senses, right? That your vision and your sense of touch and hearing. You just assume that the evidence, the information that is being delivered to you right now is uh, is trustworthy. You just trust your senses. Okay. You also trust your memory. Moment to moment, you're acting on memories. Okay. We trust in induction. We trust in deduction. Okay. Now these things have all worked for us, right? But we didn't go out and test all these things before we started applying them. We just started applying, trust in our senses and trust in our memory from earliest infancy. Okay. So you didn't have to be taught to trust your memory or to trust your senses, right? Or to look for causes, or to think of yourself as a self, or to apply induction or deduction. Okay. So that's the first criterion I would say, is that they start off as unstated assumptions. We just have them. We just come equipped with them, just like cats and dogs. Trust in their senses and trust in their memories and learn from induction and so forth. This is not a learned or acquired or a taught capacity. The second thing would be that they are universally held. In my view, these are things that everyone shares, right? So good luck finding anyone in any culture who doesn't have these basic assumptions, these presuppositions, or these basic beliefs. Okay. The third thing that makes them properly basic is that they are invariably ingredients in rationality and reasonableness. That is, we understand them to be so fundamental to what we call rationality and reasonableness that denying them, anyone who actually denied them, would be manifesting a form of obvious irrationality or even madness in our estimation. Right? Try to imagine a person who lived as if his senses were not reliable. Try to imagine a person who never assumed that something was an effect of another thing. Just lived as though there were no cause and effect, right? Or try to imagine someone who invariably just violated basic norms of deduction, right? Just constantly violating the principle of non-contradiction and principles of excluded middle and principles of identity and things like that, right? Such a person would seem completely daft, and their behavior would probably be incomprehensible to us. We probably wouldn't even be able to ascribe any mental content, any proper thoughts to them. They would seem to be violating everything that we would ascribe to them as a mental life. They would seem to violate it in their next action. Their behavior would be incomprehensible to us if people were to go around violating these basic beliefs that are unlearned and universally held. So they're ingredient in rationality. And this, I think, is something else that sets certain basic beliefs apart as being properly basic. The fourth would be that they typically you cannot defend them except on pain of circularity. So think about something like trusting in your memory. Right? We all trust in our memories. Right? We know that sometimes our memories fail us. We sometimes misremember things. We sometimes forget things. So we are subject to some failures of memory. But in general, we trust our memories. In fact, the way we identify that we've forgotten something or that we've misremembered something is very often, well, is invariably because we're relying on other memories that we have that allow us to confirm or disconfirm some memory that we're having. If you wanted to test your memory, what would you do? Well, you'd have to sort of, first of all, remember that you're setting out to test your memory. So you'd be assuming your memory in the very act of it, and then you'd have to say, okay, well, I'm going to test my memory this way. And so you'd have to devise this test, and then you'd have to carry it out. And throughout the entire action of carrying out the testing of your own memory, you'd have to keep remembering. You'd have to bear in mind what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. And then when you were evaluating the results of your test, you'd have to remember what the hell you were testing for and what the test results would mean if they turned out this way or that way. So at every step in the testing of your memory, you are in fact presupposing that your memory right now is functioning. Okay. And so it's rather hard to defend the reliability of your memories, except on pain of circularity. You have to assume the reliability of your memory to test your memory. And it's the same thing with your senses. To test the reliability of your senses is going to require that you rely on some sense experiences, right? That you carry out experiences and that you carry out some experiments rather, and that there would be experiences that you would have, visual experiences, tactile experiences, auditory experiences, and so forth, that you would have to assume are reliably conveying to you what's going on. You would, in the very act of testing the reliability and limits and failures of your senses, you would, in that act, be assuming the general reliability of your senses and memory and all the rest of it. Okay, so I think that in general, beliefs that are properly basic have this fourth condition, that they typically you cannot defend them except on pain of circularity. Now, the result of these four things is the fifth condition, and that is that they are irrevisable. Beliefs that are properly basic, in my view, are irrevisable, and that's not to be confused with indubitable or inerrant. Indubitable means you couldn't doubt them. Well, look, we can doubt these. I can doubt my senses, and I can doubt my memory, and I can doubt that there are other minds, and I can doubt that I'm a self, and I can doubt the principle of cause and effect, and I can doubt that there exists a world outside of my mind, and so forth. All of these things that I think are properly basic beliefs are all subject to doubt. You can genuinely call them into question, and you can genuinely deny them without contradiction. It's not a contradiction to say there are no other minds. It's not a contradiction to say my senses are unreliable. Right? You're not contradicting yourself in the act of saying those things. So they're not inerrant beliefs, and they're not indubitable. They are subject to doubt, right? But what they're not subject to is revision. We don't have a way of revising them. We have no grounds for rejecting them, because we'd have to invariably employ them because of the problem of circularity. We'd have to employ them in the very act of reasoning about them in order to reject them. So it's not that we couldn't be mistaken about them. It's not that they have to be true. These are not self-evident truths. These are not truisms, right? But we lack the grounds for rejecting them, except on pain of circularity. So for these 5 reasons, I think that there are certain beliefs, there are certain very, very basic beliefs within everyone's belief set that are different from other basic beliefs. There's all kinds of basic beliefs that you can have that are not like this, that are not universal, that are completely revisable, that are not universally held, and so forth, that don't satisfy these conditions that I've listed, right? But some beliefs, I think, stand apart. They are ingredient to rationality in this way, and so that sets them apart. And that's why I think there's a legitimate reason for saying that there's a class of beliefs, of basic beliefs, that are properly basic. Okay, they are really unique. They're not like other beliefs. And so these beliefs are special in that they constitute the very basis by which we can reason and arrive at the rest of all of our beliefs in our belief set. Right? That's what sets them apart. Right? And they're not just unwarranted beliefs. They're actually unwarrantable, I think. I think there's no way, I mean, there's all these philosophical problems associated with solipsism and the problem of other minds and a mind-independent reality, and how do you identify causation? Do we see causes or do we infer causes, and so forth? There's all these philosophical problems associated with them, because I think that these are beliefs that we all just have. We use them all the time. We just presuppose them. These are literally presuppositions, but they're special. They're ingredients in rationality. To such a degree that you would think a person daft if they were not acting on these, and we don't know how to revise them. We can't reject them. We don't know how to reject them. But that doesn't mean that they're true. They could be false. Every one of them could be false. So now I'll list a few things that I think are properly basic. So a belief in the existence of other minds. Right? I mean, I don't know a way to demonstrate that a system out there that looks like it has a mind actually has a mind, or is not just some cleverly engineered robot or something like that. There's no way to get around that. The idea of a mind-independent reality, that the world isn't entirely in my mind, that I'm not just fabricating all of this unconsciously or something, right? That there was actually a world outside of my mind. That I think is a properly basic belief, a presupposition we all have. A belief in the reliability of induction, a belief in the validity-preserving character of deduction, a belief in causation, and all kinds of causation, like billiard balls hitting each other, that kind of cause and effect, but also things like mental causation, like perception, that I have a mental experience that's caused by, I look at this glass of beer and I have a mental experience and form a belief that there's a glass of beer there. That's mental causation. There's also when I, decide to raise my arm goes up. That's mental causation. That I think is properly basic. The very concept of truth and falsity, I think, is properly basic. Right? It's the idea that sentences and beliefs express propositions which can correspond or fail to correspond with states of affairs, right? I don't want to get into theories of truth because it's really complicated, but just ask yourself, what would it mean to say that a definition of truth is correct or accurate? I suppose you have a theory of truth, and two philosophers are debating theories of truth. Which is the right theory, right? It's kind of hard to get at that, and part of it is that words like correct and accurate and stuff like that presume the concept of truth, right? So I think it's a very basic, very fundamental belief that we have this concept of truth, right? And as I said, the reliability of perception, the reliability of your memory, the idea that you are a unified self or an agent. I think all of these are beliefs that are special. They are properly basic in that we don't know how to revise them. We can't really defend them except on pain of circularity at some point. And they're ingredients in rationality. They're universally held, and we didn't have to learn them. So those are the 5 criteria, and those are examples of properly basic beliefs. Hope that helps.
Okay, so it's explained. End of hangout. Everyone go home.
Can you repeat that? I just didn't capture the question. Odin?
No, I didn't ask the question. I was just being snarky. Go ahead and ask your question.
I didn't understand what you said, Odin.
Can you refresh?
Yeah, I think that might.
You might have 5. Max wanted to ask a question, then I want to ask about each individual of these 5.
Right. When we were talking about the properly basic beliefs a while ago when this topic came out in the community, I believe there was a distinction made between what's called theistic reliabilism, and this is put forward by reliabilists like Alvin Plantinga, and a more, I believe you called it an evolutionary reliabilism. Would the type of reliabilism one take also go into the properly basic belief category? Or is that really more of a separate justification based on properly basic beliefs about the external constraints about why our senses are as reliable as they are?
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. I'm an evolutionary reliabilist. I think that the sort of the best account of knowledge is not something like justified true belief. I think the best definition of knowledge is something close to reliably produced true belief, but then you need an account of reliability, and I think that reliability has to be understood as a consequence of evolution. So I'm an evolutionary reliabilist, but my commitment to evolutionary reliabilism is not properly basic. It's not even basic. It's not a basic belief. This is like the frosting on the cake. It's not fundamental to my worldview. It's something that I could be talked out of. It's something that I was talked into very late in my when I was pursuing a philosophical career. So I don't think it's anything like properly basic, and I don't even think it's basic. I think it's
Can you go over real quick what makes something a properly basic belief, just a basic belief? I know there's those constraints you were just talking about, but is that to make it basic or is that to make it properly basic?
No, that's what the 5 things that I listed are the things that make something properly basic. There's all kinds of basic beliefs. Now, the thing is, it's hard to define basic belief because different philosophers will define it differently, and maybe Hypatia can speak to that. I think she knows quite a lot about this. Some people will define a basic belief as any belief that is absolutely fundamental. It's at the bottom of your worldview. It's plugged into everything else. Everything else rests on it. Okay, so let's use God as an example because we're in the Great Debate, and that's where this expression "properly basic belief" usually comes up, is in the context of that, owing to the philosopher Alvin Plantinga, who's a theist who, in his Reformed epistemology, has really promoted this idea of properly basic belief, and is the person who's most strongly associated with the concept. He thinks that God is properly basic. Now, for some people, what they mean by something being a basic belief is that it's right there. It's at the bottom. It's plugged into everything. Now, if you believe in God, well, your belief in God can be used to sort of justify, your trust in the reliability of your senses and memory and induction and so forth. We've heard presuppositionalists make that argument. A lot of people use the idea of God's existence as a necessary precondition for morality, for instance. So for some people, you don't even have to be like a philosopher or be philosophically inclined to think this way. A lot of people just think, well, how can anything exist? Well, there had to have been a creator. Poof. Right? So God is integral into their very conception of ontology of why anything exists. Something had to exist first, and it couldn't have had a beginning, right? Because then it would have been a regress. So something's always existed. That there's got to be some eternal thing, and it's responsible for everything else. It's responsible for why there's order and beauty and pattern and harmony and uniformity in the world. It explains for them why there is a moral order in the first place. It satisfies a certain desire for justice. And whenever they engage in moral reasoning, the concept of what God wants enters into their calculus of what they ought to do, right? So in that sense, a belief in a God can be integral to your entire worldview, right? I would argue it's not properly basic, though, because I don't think that's an innate belief. I think that's an acquired and learned belief. It's not universal, although it's very close to universal, but it's not perfectly universal. And you can of course deny it, and I think but it's not just deniable the way the properly basic beliefs are, but it's actually revisable. You can actually sort of reason your way out of a belief in that, and you're not exhibiting any manifest irrationality or violation of our epistemic norms if you deny that there is a God. So you can just be an atheist or someone who's never even heard of a God, just be completely non-theistic or agnostic, and you can be just ticking along perfectly normally, and no one questions your sanity, even though you don't believe in God. So for that reason, I think that something like a God belief is a basic belief. It's fundamental to everything else you believe, but it's not properly basic. It doesn't stand apart as a special category. It just happens to be fundamental to the rest of your beliefs, right? But if that belief were to change, the rest of your belief architecture would change, but we wouldn't think that you were daft or something like that you've gone loony.
Yeah, I don't see how it would be properly basic to accept a God or not, because you can function just fine either way. If you say that I don't accept that the universe is real, there is some questionality there to your sanity, or if you have a rational thought process to say, well, I don't accept the universe is real. I mean, this is all just a fantasy. That's kind of, yeah, I guess you could do that. It's some kind of global skepticism, but doesn't it kind of make it appear that you're probably just not all there for your faculties if that's the route you want to go? I mean, if somebody wants to live their life that way, that's great for them, I guess, but that doesn't really that they're really functional, in my opinion. Not functional with the rest of everybody else who just says, okay, yeah, the universe exists. I don't have to take it contingently that God exists to function in my life, do I?
Well, no. Although, just to speak about probably some skeptics, probably of the academic sort, in ancient Greece there were a big contingent of philosophers that didn't accept knowledge was tenable. Although if you were probably to look at them in their day-to-day lives, they would just act as if these things were true. Like David Hume was pretty much a skeptic of causation, but when he was playing billiards, I think he would have acted just as if causality was happening around him. You could act as if these things were true and still also be a rationally functioning person, but you'd also have to play a lot of psychological suppression as well. You'd have to borrow a phrase from the presuppositionalist, you'd have to suppress the truth in your skepticism, as it were, in order to function. I think probably that would be another way of reformulating it. Everyone, if you don't even accept these propositions as being true, in order to function, you'd have to just at the very face of it act as if they're true nonetheless.
Yeah, could I just add a little something to that? One way to think of this is that the beliefs that are basic to our worldview to everyone's worldview, I would argue. And that's sort of one of the critical things is these are, the ones I'm calling properly basic are not just basic to my worldview. I think they're basic to everyone's worldview, right? They're universal and they're unlearned and all of that. But think of them as enabling assumptions. These are the assumptions that we make. These are the assumptions that we have to make. Okay, but we don't have to make them in the sense that we couldn't deny them. You can deny them, and you can deny them without contradiction, right? It's just that everything that we understand as rationality rests on them, right? All you have to do is imagine, take anything in the list that I gave of beliefs that I would consider properly basic, and imagine a person that didn't believe them. Not someone who just said that they didn't believe, not someone who merely professes to not believe them, right? Not someone who's feigning skepticism about them, but someone who actually doesn't believe them and acts accordingly, right? That person is going to look crazy. They're either going to look, crazy, or at best their behavior is going to seem incomprehensible to us to the extent that they live this way, right? And a lot of people, a lot of philosophers have been to make a living denying these things, calling these things into question. But if you look at how people live, right, they do live as if they believe in the concept of truth, in a concept that they have a self, in the concept of causality. They trust in induction, they trust in the validity-preserving character of deduction, and so forth. And so, when they say that they're not committed to these things at all, there I think there is a kind of performative contradiction. That is, the way they live and what they say they believe are two different things, right? I think we all, in fact, no matter what we say, believe them, even though I myself think, listen, I know I don't have good reason to believe these things, right? I cannot defend these things. I don't have a good defense of these things. I'm going to end up arguing in a circle somewhere along the way in the course of defending these things. I don't mean that I'm going to contradict myself necessarily, but I'm going to argue in a circle. I'm going to have to assume one or more of these, or in the testing of them, and usually I'm going to end up assuming the very thing in question. Most of the time that's what you end up doing, is assuming the very thing that you're supposed to be defending or proving or establishing gets used, gets assumed, gets taken for granted in the very act of trying to defend the proposition, right? So I'll give the example with your memory and with your senses and stuff like that. So think of these as enabling assumptions. These are the assumptions that we just have to make. This is just sort of the human predicament. This is an epistemological limit. It would be nice if all of everything that we believe, like all of your political beliefs, all of your beliefs about people around you, your ordinary perceptual beliefs, every belief you have on any subject, if all of those could reduce down to a set of basic beliefs which were self-evident, that would be fantastic. Right, that would be, even if you didn't do it perfectly, if in principle it were possible, that would be terrific. But I don't think that that's true. I think that we just have to, in fact, make assumptions, and these assumptions, I think, are unwarranted and unwarrantable. We don't know how to warrant them, and I could wish that it were otherwise, but I think that
could coherentism help you there?
Not epistemic predicament. Sorry, go ahead.
Could coherentism help you here, saying that you need all these things to come together to actually, for reality to work, and therefore you can justify it on those grounds?
Well, a coherentist, as opposed to a foundationalist, would be someone who says, oh, look, the edifice of our knowledge isn't like a building on a foundation, that's set in the ground, and then the bits of knowledge and beliefs that you have are like bricks in an edifice that are all resting on top of this solid foundation, or as solid a foundation as you can. A coherentist is someone who sort of holds more to a more holistic picture, imagines that knowledge is more like a raft, it's sort of floating at sea. There's a lot of different ways to build a raft, and you have to sort of rework your raft and rebuild your raft over the course of your life, and you don't get into dry dock. You have to sort of build it at sea. People sometimes use an idea of a web of belief, of interconnection.
Yes, but the key thing is surely that this web of belief really works, and you can't. It works so well that you can justify it. There are so many parts to it, and they all fit together so well. You can say that therefore that must be true. Isn't that what coherentism is?
Well,
it seems kind of pragmatic.
They all support each other. All these different beliefs.
Yeah.
They're mutually
Like,
supporting the way a web is mutually supporting, in the way a raft keeps itself afloat because all the parts are there in that order. You could redesign a raft that won't float, right? Just pile the timbers one on top of one another, or in some stupid way, and the whole or thing apart, right? But if you design a raft a certain way, it'll float. And there's a lot of ways to build a raft such that it will float. And it's the same thing. There's a lot of ways to design a web that will sustain a weight, that will work. But you got to be careful with the idea of something working. What's our test of working? Part of what's fundamental in a belief set is how you identify what works and what doesn't, right? Right. The very criteria for what it means for something to work, how you identify something as working or not working, whether your belief set is functioning or not. That's one of the basic beliefs in there, right? That's one of the ingredients in rationality, right? So you can't sort of say, oh well, there's this independent standard, whether or not it works, right? Whether or not it works, your criteria for what constitutes it working or not working is part of the belief set, right? That's one of the very things at issue, right?
It's the most foundational thing of the belief set, ironically enough.
Yeah, well, that's why I think these are properly basic, because all of the ones that I've listed, I think, are ingredients in rationality and reasonableness, right? These are not just sort of...
well,
did
did
Ozzy
he cut
stop
out for
for
you
you,
guys?
or was it me?
What's
Okay.
that?
No, he's back.
Oh,
You cut out for like 5 seconds.
Oh, okay. What I was saying there is that the properly basic beliefs are not just beliefs that help you sort of get along with other people in the world and socially and stuff like that. They're actually beliefs that are ingredients in rationality and reasonableness. They are the ones that allow you to evaluate all the rest of your beliefs and how you should update your beliefs and revise your beliefs and add new beliefs and reject beliefs, right? Everything else in your belief set rests on these beliefs, as I see it.
Yeah, but surely that's also part of the web. I mean, the fact that you've got this foundational, could you not argue that's part of the coherent web, that one of your beliefs in this web is how you evaluate the validity of it, and the fact that you've got a lot of different ways that it could be wrong.
Right.
I mean, therefore, there's so the chance of this being randomly, and you could say this way of testing things works so well, and all the things it tests on work well, and they all support one another in so many different ways. Therefore, it must be working. It must be right.
Right, but your very criteria for what constitutes working is one of the beliefs, right? So I mean, there's no sort of getting out of this. There's no dry dock. There's no position of sort of neutrality over which you're going to look at all of these things, right? It is possible to imagine someone who had completely different properly basic beliefs, right? Who just rejected all the ones that I listed and believed other things and could function and tick along normally. I can imagine that, right? I can't imagine it in any specifics. I mean, if I could, I would put it forward as an alternative way of looking at reality and an alternative form of rationality. But I, in fact, don't know of an alternative form of rationality. But so I think we're sort of stuck with this. But it's not a contradiction. It's not incoherent to say, well, people could have just completely different epistemic norms, completely different, where they would deny all of these and they would embrace different ones, right? In principle, I don't have an objection to that. And the reason I am not opposed to that in principle is I don't know how to warrant the ones I've got, right? If I could warrant them, I would. I would love to be able to, but I don't know how. And I think it's just we're just anyone who wants to self-identify as a critical thinker and a skeptic has to at least be willing to admit what our epistemological limits are, what we can show and what we can't show, what we do know how to show and what we don't know how to show. And in the case of these, I don't think we're even close to coming up with convincing arguments for why we should assume that they're true. I think we just do, and everything else follows from that. But there's an important ingredient here. Some people are going to worry that, holy crap, is this guy, going on and licensing people to believe any old damn thing on insufficient evidence because he said these things are unwarranted and he thinks it's okay to believe these things. Well, I don't think it's okay to believe these things. I think we just do, okay? But these beliefs that I think are properly basic for the reasons that I gave are the very things that we use to figure out everything else that we can believe and shouldn't believe. They are the very grounds of rationality. They are the basis on which we reject or accept other beliefs. So accepting these is the very thing that allows us to license a person to believe something, or to say, no, 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 I disavow that. That's crap. That's nonsense. That's irrational. That's a fallacy, right? Um, so this is not some kind of carte blanche. This is not a blank check. This is not a license to believe any old damn thing. But it just turns out that the very thing that allows you to disavow certain forms of reasoning as illegitimate, that very thing that allows you to do that, rests on beliefs that are themselves unwarrantable, right?
Wouldn't you expect this, though? If you ignore the coherentist attempt view, you can say that as you dig down in your beliefs and try and justify them, work out, you will either hit the boundary that you mentioned, or it's going to go on indefinitely and regress infinitely. Therefore, you're going to expect boundaries to these various things, these various questions you might have about the way the reality seems to be, because they've got to stop, or they carry on indefinitely. Therefore, these are entirely things you would expect. It's not like they're unexpected. You should expect them.
Yeah. Although a lot of people have a naive intuition. I think it's naive that somehow these things will come. Everything will ground down into something that is self-evident and undeniable, right? And unfortunately, our concept of undeniability, logically, something being logically undeniable on pain of contradiction, I think rests on a kind of intuition, right? Even the idea of deduction rests, I think, an awful lot on intuitions. And how do you justify deduction? Well, what the heck are you going to use to justify deduction? You're going to have to use some kind of inferential procedure. Well, you've got a meta deduction that you're going to use to justify the act of deduction. I don't think that's going to work. So like you said, you're going to either end up in a regress or it's going to end somewhere. Wittgenstein actually had an interesting sort of imagery. This idea of digging. He said that, you just dig and dig for reasons. You're digging for reasons. You're digging for justification. But at some point, your spade is turned. You hit bedrock. Boom. And you just say, this is simply what I do. And I think that's what it's like. I think that's what happens. I think when it comes to properly basic beliefs, we have been digging and digging and digging and digging and trying to understand why we believe what we believe and what makes things rational. And at some point, our spade is turned. You hit bedrock and you go, damn it, there's no digging any deeper than this. This is as deep as I can go. But I can appreciate that I have in fact not reached something that isn't undeniable. These things are deniable. Philosophers can do and should call them into question and raise doubts about them. And just because they're irrevisable, just because the grounds for revising them and replacing them with something else seem to be lacking, is not a reason to assume that they therefore have to be true. They don't have to be true. Right? It's just these are the enabling assumptions that make rationality possible and belief revision and belief formation possible.
I think Odie
just as you want to go ahead, Steve?
Odie's been waiting to go. Odie, go ahead. What's your question?
All right.
Okay, so my question is, wouldn't it safe to say that even before you can even conjure these various different concepts of proper beliefs, right, as to what is a proper belief and what is not, those things need to be in place? So you have to initially believe those things before you can even challenge those things in the first place. They need to exist in order for you to challenge, right?
The beliefs need to exist? Well, what I'm arguing is that before you can do any investigation into anything, including these, you're taking them for granted. You're taking for granted right now, supposing you're going to be a philosopher and you can say, I'm going to call into question these properly basic beliefs and stuff like that. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I got news for you. You're assuming that you have a mind and that you have thoughts, and all of those thoughts are your thoughts. Right? It's not like I'm thinking this thought and someone else is thinking another thought. No, these are all thoughts. These are all happening to me. I'm a unified self, right? And because I'm interested in things like a subject like the reliability of my senses and memories and stuff like that, I'm automatically committed to the idea of a world outside of my mind that isn't just my mind. I'm committed to the idea of cause and effect, right? That my senses and my memory somehow co-vary systematically in a way with states of affairs. That commits me to the concept of truth, right? So like, just before anything can happen, before much can happen in the way of thinking, there's just a ton of stuff that you're committed to. We don't realize how much we are committed to, right? But we are in fact assuming just a ton of stuff in the act of thinking about anything, and we're doing it constantly. And all of this is so close to us, right? We've done it every moment of our lives for so long, we're not even aware that we've been doing it, which is why it seems weird and alien to suggest that this is what's going on. But I think that that's what's going on. It's sort of too close to see, and that's why so many things like David Hume, I think, is sort of, one of the greatest philosophers of all, because he really pointed out things that were so problematic that were, when you think about them, obviously problematic, but before you think about them, are not problematic. Things like induction, things like causation, problems of the self, problems of perception, and so forth, right? Mental causation, all of these things, when you think about them, wow, this is these are concepts that are really hard to make sense of. But I mean, people were just not really calling into question something like induction, right? I mean, heck, how could you not assume that the future is going to resemble the past? I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? I mean, induction worked for me last time, it's going to work for me tomorrow, right? Induction has served me well in the past, it'll serve me in the future, right? Most people just didn't realize
can we take
what a circular argument that is, right?
Can we take the uniformity of nature as a properly basic belief?
I think a commitment to the uniformity is, I think a commitment to induction is a commitment to believing in the uniformity of nature. Now, believing in the sense of, I take it for granted, I assume that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects. I understand perfectly that, in fact, that could change. For all I know, the universe is a weird thing where it ticks along a certain way for 14 billion years, and then, poof, everything changes. For all I know, that's what's going to happen, right? I don't think that's what's going to happen, but I don't have a way of denying that. I don't have a principled argument why that can't happen, except to say, well, nothing like that's ever happened before. But that's using induction again, and I'm arguing in a circle.
He doesn't like the fact that I can say that I could take the uniformity of nature a priori, because I use this as an example. You tell me if this is a good example, Ozzy. I say, look, if we're going to send the Juno probe to Jupiter, we have to make the assumption that the laws of physics are going to be the same today as they are tomorrow and throughout this trip, right? If we don't, it can never get there. So we have to make that basal assumption that, yes, the laws of physics are going to be the same. So once it gets there, we can put it in an orbit around Jupiter, and there's a uniformity of nature there. Without having that assumption, how could we make any predictive modeling, and how could we make anything happen like that?
Right, but we've got to be careful.
That's not the test, though, is it? Yes, that's just saying if it goes wrong, then you've been proved wrong. So that doesn't really help you. We have to make that assumption, but that doesn't mean to say that it's true.
And just because some beliefs have to be accepted a priori, and you can build on those, it doesn't mean that a priori beliefs are exhaustive of beliefs, or that a posteriori beliefs can't come into play either. It just means, in terms of the most foundational levels, we have to make a priori beliefs. In terms of the uniformity of nature, that would actually just be a part of it, because how are you going to think rationally if you're going to assume things like the way your mind is going to work can change at any second? That's something that can induce skepticism quite a bit. It wouldn't be an assumption based on this, because these beliefs are things we'd have to assume on the outset.
Yeah, can I say something to what Steve was just saying? You got to be careful when you're arguing with presuppositionalists, right? It is very tempting to say, well, listen, look, if we don't assume these things, we won't be able to do science, But what a presuppositionalist is going to say, and I think rightly so, is, well, yeah, but then maybe you're just not entitled to do science on your worldview. Maybe you have to either acknowledge that you are making a faith commitment, or that perhaps there's another account, and they would propose that God would explain or account for the uniformity of nature. In other words, they're saying you've got this uncashed check. You're assuming that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects. You're not entitled to assume that on your worldview. They would argue, but they would. Well, I don't. I think you're right about that. I think I can say, wait a minute. If you're entitled to assume a God with an unchanging nature, I am entitled to assume a universe with an unchanging nature. I think that's a little bit less metaphysically extravagant.
Well, hold on.
But even that needs an argument.
Yeah, because surely there's no. I mean, God has been defined as unchanging and timeless and all those things, but we're living in a changing, non-timeless environment, and therefore it's quite different. So you can say just because we're all in this strange godlike area of reality or non-reality, whatever you want to call it, and then there's other completely different universe reality, I don't see that you can equate the belief in one therefore means you can believe in the other.
Well, I mean, in the realm of metaphysics, it's about really the study of the nature of the most foundational things and what is it. For Christians and theists of many persuasion, God is unchanging and He's the most foundational, and everything changes around His will. Whereas people who take a materialistic approach, and that's just the notion that at the base of things is matter and energy. There's matter and energy have a basic function out of which everything else arises and emerges from there. So that basic function of matter and energy, it would be the most foundational, and the rules that we apply to them, strictly speaking, are unchanging. However, change happens as things emerge on the higher levels of the universe, and this is where things like physics, chemistry, biology all emerge from. Like, that would probably be the best way to parse out the metaphysical differences and commitments naturalists have as compared to theists themselves.
I think it's still meaningful to relate back to what Steve said, that to ask how else could we make predictions
That's irrelevant.
if it isn't the case. Well,
How is
you
that
still want to. Why would you not want to make predictions? It seems to me
You may
like
want to, but it doesn't. But just because you have to make assumptions about uniformity to get a satellite to go around Jupiter doesn't mean to say that you're justified in saying, well, that's going to work all the
I'm not
time.
saying I'm justified. There's no justification for it. That's why I'm taking it a priori.
Okay, but hang on. We got to be careful here. What a presuppositionalist is challenging you to is to justify the assumption.
Yes.
What a presuppositionalist
I can justify the assumption itself, though, by saying simply that without making that assumption, I cannot have predictive modeling.
Okay, but wait a second. Wait a second. Wait.
You can't make predictive modeling then.
No, he doesn't. No, wait. He doesn't have.
I can say that the universe is not changing. For that.
Wait. Stop. You got to be careful with this
first time I talked.
There's this pragmatic argument that people want to go
pragmatic.
to. Oh yeah, but you got to be careful. You got to.
I'm a pragmatist.
You need to be careful, Steve. You need to be careful. You're not being careful enough.
All right, hang on, Rumpus. Go ahead, Ozzy.
Okay.
I'm getting Ozzy spanked down right now. Come on.
Well, no. But you don't want to say, well, look, this is what we have to do in order to get anywhere, to get science, working.
Exactly.
Right? You don't want to make that argument because he's going to say, what is your reason for thinking that these are the assumptions that you have to make? And you're going to say, well, listen, in the past we've made all these assumptions, and look at what science has delivered to us. If we didn't make these assumptions, or before we made these assumptions, science wasn't able to deliver these sorts of things. Right? That's an inductive argument, right? Yeah. How do you know that's going to continue to work, right?
Exactly.
You don't want to assume the very thing. You're being asked. You're being asked by a presuppositionalist. How do you justify your confidence in the uniformity of nature and induction? And you can't say, well, induction has worked well in the past, or making these kinds of assumptions and trusting in these enabling assumptions and property basic beliefs has worked well in the past, therefore it will in the future. Whoa, wait a minute. You just walk right into it again. You just assumed the very thing I asked you to warrant, right? What you have to do, I think, is concede. I can't, right? I
agree with you.
I don't pretend to, and I don't pretend to, right? Don't. It is very, very tempting to argue in a circle here without realizing it. And
no, I can see the circularity in there. Yeah. I can definitely see the circularity.
I think a better challenge is to sort of turn around on the presuppositionalist and say, well, how do you solve the problem? I don't see how positing a God with an unchanging, timeless nature.
I mean, that was what I was getting to.
Yeah, I don't think they have an answer to this question. What I'm suggesting is that no one has an answer to these questions. These are perennial problems of philosophy. These chestnut problems of philosophy have been around for a long time because I think we don't have answers. Here's my view of it. We sort of made my big metaphysical picture here. I don't think nature gives a damn whether organisms have cognitive engines, brains, capable of fully justifying how their cognitive architecture works and how everything in their overall cognitive economy works and is justified. I think that nature doesn't give a damn about that. Nature, I think, is interested in and I'm anthropomorphizing here or personifying here when I say nature wants. But what natural selection is capable of producing, let's put it that way, what natural selection is capable of producing are systems that have belief-forming engines, namely brains, perceptual systems and inferential practices and so forth, that systematically covary with changing states of affairs in the world, and they just have to work. And if they work, they get passed along, and they can get improved. The benefits of this can accumulate over time, and consequently, brains can get better at tracking and modeling reality. Sort of think of your brain as a map-making tool that maps the terrain of reality. Okay. Now, but of course, it is not necessary for us to be able to understand whether or not nature will be uniform for us to exploit what uniformities have existed. Right? There just have to have been enough uniformities in nature in the past for natural selection to have favored systems, cognitive systems, brains like ours, to map reality and to systematically covary with changing states of affairs so that we can map that reality. There's no guarantee that it will continue to work, and natural selection doesn't have to provide us with some kind of meta ability to secure and guarantee, based on some insight into metaphysical truths about why this is all going to work and why this has to work. That's not necessary, right? I mean, look, my dog uses induction, okay? But my dog doesn't think to itself, there's a black crow, there's a black crow, there's a black crow, all crows are black, or my food was in this dish yesterday, my food was in this dish the day before, my food was in that dish the day before that, there's my dog dish, my food will appear there today at a certain time, right? My dog just uses induction, but it doesn't think through these propositions.
You can't revoke reliabilism then? You can't revoke some kind of reliable thing? That is
well, just let me finish the point. So the idea is, just as a dog doesn't have to consciously do induction, it just has beliefs induced in it through experience, through repeated exposures to relevantly similar experiences. It doesn't have to think these things through as premises. Okay. Similarly, we can have a capacity to use deduction and trust and induction and all of these sorts of things without having a capacity to guarantee the veracity of the assumptions that we make. These are just assumptions that we make, just like a dog makes assumptions. We have the ability to think about them, and one of the things we can realize about them is that I don't know how to ground these things. I don't know how to defend these things. I don't think, and ultimately I've come to the conclusion that they're unwarrantable. Sorry, what was your question?
Oh, I'd asked, if something is reliable in the past, though, can we just base it on some kind of reliabilism that, we've had an expectation of something being working for us in the past, therefore we can rely on that information through induction that it'll be working for us in the future, or is that circular?
No, it's circular if you're trying to justify the procedure, right? Of course, why do I trust in science? Well, because it's worked so damn well. Look what it has delivered to us, right? I trust in the scientific method for the same reason that I trust in the evidence of my senses. These are things that have served me very, very well in updating my map. And so that's why I trust in it. It has a proven track record. But a proven track record doesn't mean that it's going to continue to work. A track record is only going to be useful to you as a predictor of the future if the future is going to resemble the past. But if what is called into question is that the future will resemble the past, you're kind of screwed, right? So look, science and induction and all that stuff, it all works perfectly and it all makes perfect sense and it's all perfectly justifiable on the assumption that the future will resemble the past in relevant respects. But if you call that into question, now we've got a problem. Okay, we don't know how to justify it. Right? Now, as a matter of fact, we don't ordinarily call it into question, but we just have to understand that there are limits to not just limits to what we can know. There are limits on what we know that we can know. Right, and that's a way to think about this. Right, that we are trying to understand sort of the fundamentals of our belief set and how the entire rest of our belief set is formed and what it rests on. And it turns out it rests on certain things that we don't know to guarantee. Okay, that kind of sucks, but so what? That's just the way it is, right? Nature didn't owe us anything more than that. Nature is just about leaving more surviving offspring than your conspecifics. It's not about arriving at a map of reality that is self-guaranteeing. It's just about producing a map of reality that allows you to leave more surviving offspring, right? So it's not a coincidence that our brains map reality accurately to a degree, but natural selection doesn't owe it to us to be able to have a mind capable of generating arguments and reasons and apprehending metaphysical truths about whether or not the future will resemble the past, and the ultimate reliability of our memory, and the nature of the self, and whether causes are actually in the world or is some kind of imposed thing from our mind, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, no one said reality. We haven't got a certificate somewhere from reality saying I'm comprehensible. You can rely on me or anything like that. And I'm going to slag off philosophers here, but they spend you can spend a lot of time trying to invalidate anything you believe could be true. But obviously, it's worth trying to find out whether the things can be true, and you can be certain about things. But it seems to me there's a lot of mileage that's used on trying to find things you can't solve.
Speaking of getting a certificate from reality saying I'm comprehensible, I actually do have that certificate. I picked it up from Patriot Bible College, so in your face.
Damn! I wish I had the. Ooh.
Sorry to bring Ken Hovind into this, but
you've broken my understanding of reality now, Max. That's a very valuable piece of paper.
Well, one thing I actually did want to bring up in relation to this, though, was the distinction between what's often called, and it was coined by Wilfrid Sellers, the scientific image, the image of reality science gives us, and the manifest image. How we see reality through our senses and our perceptions. It's one thing I want to bring up about this kind of epistemological approach is it seems to privilege quite a bit our manifest image, because it speaks about mostly our experiences and what we need to assume about the world. For example, one of them was causation, about how we always have to make causal inferences about A causes B, and without A we wouldn't have B, and things of that nature. But if one looks at the scientific image, at least at the level of physics, a lot of causal talk is considered to be very folkish in nature. It's not really helpful. What you'll see in a physics textbook is a lot of mathematical equations. You will not see the word cause put into one of the equations, at least to my knowledge. So one question I want to bring up is, does this unduly justify the manifest image over the scientific one? And if there is any clash, what would justify us not siding with the manifest image over the scientific image?
When you say does this unduly privilege the manifest image, what is the this that you're referring to?
The this would be this epistemological approach.
The idea of properly basic beliefs?
Yeah, exactly. Does it privilege the manifest over the scientific?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I would have to think about this a little more. But I just, off the top of my head, I would say I don't think so. But that's because I have. It's funny you mentioned Wilfrid Sellers and his idea of the manifest image and the scientific.
Yeah, what is that? I didn't quite pick up what that was.
The scientific image is the image of reality that science provides us, and the manifest image is the image of reality we build through our senses and our experiences. I think that's a nice little summary there.
Okay.
Ozzy, you want to add to it?
Yeah, there's another philosopher, actually happens to be a Christian, actually a Catholic, named Bas C. van Frazen, who wrote a book called The Scientific Image, where he talks about this, and I was very influenced by that book, actually. If anyone's interested in philosophy of science, I'd recommend it to you. And he writes about the scientific image. But one way to think of science is that it's a perceptual tool. Think of science like a microscope or like a telescope, right? I mean, look, do you see with your eyes or do you see through your eyes? It's kind of an interesting question to think about. Do you see with your eyes or through your eyes, right? Well, one way of thinking of your eyes is that they're like a telescope or a periscope or a microscope or something like that. There's something through which you see. They are your window into the world, right? And a telescope is, you see through a telescope, and I see through my eyes. But you can also see through science, right? I don't know if any of you ever had this experience, but I mean, at some point in your childhood, you found out that it's the Earth that's spinning, and you look up at the stars at night, and I mean, if you live in a place that is filled with so much light pollution that you can see the stars, you can see the stars moving. And I live fairly far north, so I see the circumpolar stars moving around the star Polaris, and I see them rotating around like this. And when you understand that you're on a ball and that it's spinning, that motion looks different to you. You experience it differently. I'm experiencing the motion of the stars through the scientific image. And I had an experience akin to a religious experience one time. I was working in a field. I was on a tractor. I grew up in the country. I was working in the country on a tractor one day, and I was sitting in this hay field with a wagon full of manure that I was dumping off. And I was I just turned off the engine of the tractor, and I was listening to all of the cicadas. Those are these grasshopper-like critters that make this high-pitched whining noise. And I was listening to that, and I could hear frogs in a swamp nearby, and I was watching birds and stuff like that. And I was just filled with this Darwinian vision. I had just recently read On the Origin of Species by Darwin, and everywhere I looked, I was seeing plants in competition, aggressively in competition with one another for space and resources and soil and sunlight and water. And I could hear insects, and hearing them in their multitude like that just filled me with a sense of these things are all striving to attract mates at the same time. Meanwhile, there were swallows, swooping around, and flycatchers, picking up insects in the air. And I was filled with this sense of bellum omnium contra omnes, the war of all against all. All right, I wasn't looking at the world through my manifest image, but before that, before reading The Origin of Species, I would not have looked at a plant as a system that is effectively at war with everything else around it. I thought of plants as decorations, okay? But then after reading The Origin of Species, I was looking at plants and insects through the scientific image, right? I was seeing reality differently, fundamentally differently. And that's how I see science, and I understand science as resting on these properly basic beliefs, as built up on and made out of these unwarrantable commitments that are universal. We all have them. I don't think anybody doesn't have them. That none of us really had to learn. A little bit of deduction we have to learn, but there's an innate kind of deduction I think that we all do. Most opponents, for instance. And so no, I don't think that I'm privileging the manifest image, because I think the scientific image is just another set of beliefs, but it's another set of beliefs that allows me to look at the world differently, just like my eyeballs let me look at the world differently depending on what my eyeballs deliver to me. And similarly, the scientific image delivers a different world to me. I update my map of reality on the basis of what science delivers to me in exactly the same sense that I think I do with through direct sensory perception. It's just not immediate, and it's not easy, and it is a human enterprise, a human undertaking, a cultural undertaking. Science is, as opposed to looking through my eyeballs, which is a private and individual undertaking. I don't need the collaboration of other people, and I don't need transgenerational cooperation and a commitment to a project over multiple generations in the way that we do with science. But I think that we see through science just like we see through our eyeballs. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, just it would probably help if you were to use kind of the example I gave just for my edification. I gave the example of kind of causality and how physics would call that into question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is one of the. Okay, this is actually interesting. Science is one of the things that calls into question our beliefs. I mean, people. A lot of people in the atheist community online and get a little testy about philosophy and philosophers because they're calling into question things like induction and causation, the reliability of the senses, and all this stuff, right? But I mean, look, when philosophers are doing this, they're doing this on the basis of consulting reality, right? The fact that we're subject to inferential failures, the fact that we're subject to perceptual failures, the fact that we're all of these sorts of things. These are the deliverances of science. This is what science has brought to the table for philosophers to think about, and philosophers have gone, hey, how about that? Our minds are not just perfect epistemic engines. We are not epistemic angels that just look at the world and poof, we're filled with true beliefs. It doesn't work that way. Our minds construct things. Our memories are integrative and constructive. They're not recording devices. It is science that has taught us that memory is constructive and integrative and creative, and isn't sort of a faithful playback device, right? So science can actually undermine our confidence in some of the things that are part of the manifest image, but also science is part of what motivates our reason to call into question these properly basic beliefs. And causation is one of those things. Causation is something that philosophers such as David Hume have sort of pointed out is kind of problematic and weird, and not as simple as we think. But then, when you get into high energy particle physics and quantum phenomena, and non-locality and all kinds of weird things like that, the concept of what a thing is, of what a particle is, our concepts of time and space, our intuitive concepts of time and space have been shattered by science completely. So we no longer think of our minds as just apprehending a reality that is just out there waiting to be apprehended and represented accurately, right? So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question to your satisfaction, but I think that the concept of causation was undermined by philosophers, and it's been undermined even more by scientists. Physicists don't, like you said, don't use the concept of causation quite as much as we would tend to think that they do. There's not a lot of causal talk in a physics textbook, right? They talk a lot more about regularities and relationships, specifically relationships between quantities and forces and things like that. But there's not a lot of causal talk in the physics textbook.
Do you think that because causal talk isn't warranted in physics, that we should then also go to the inference that causal talk should just not be warranted at all? Because it seems to me that causal talk in our day-to-day lives is something we are committed to. If, like in a court proceeding, if you're to say Ozzy stabbed somebody in the chest, you can't really boil that down to talk of quantum mechanics. One would have to be committed in some sense to causal speak. So it's not something we could probably justify, but at the same time, I don't think, on the other hand, physics would completely warrant us abandoning causal talk at all, at least on the macroscopic level.
Well, I mean, it is possible. Theoretically, it is possible that the concept of causality is something that is only relevant and only expressed at a certain level of description and doesn't exist at a lower level of description, right? Quantum events, they happen at the quantum level. It's not happening at this sort of gross surface level of objects of middle size and stuff like that, right? Maybe a particle could just sort of wink in and out of experience. A virtual particle can wink in and out of existence or something like that. But we're not seeing tables and chairs winking in and out of existence and stuff like that, right? So, I don't think we're going to dispense with the concept of causality. But if we ever dispense with the concept of causality because of what science puts forward, it will be in the sense that we've dispensed with sunsets. You know, I still see the sun rise and set, right? But I now have to think about it differently. I have to think of it not in terms of the sun actually moving. I have to remember, oh, right, here it is turning, and I now see a sunrise and sunset differently. But we can still talk about sunrises and sunsets, right? And so it's possible that our sense of causation will change dramatically. We might understand that causes operate at certain levels, not other levels, or we might understand that our commitment to causation is just part of this primitive brain, right? It's part of this reptile brain. It's an assumption that we make, but it has no basis in reality. Right? That's a possibility. I mean, we might discover that, right? The scientific image can completely undermine and override the manifest image, but we're always going to feel the manifest image. We're always going to have it. It doesn't go away. We're going to be born with it. So I think we're always going to be, every generation is going to be born believing in these properly basic beliefs, and if we ever demonstrate that some of them are false and replace them with something else, we're going to have a problem. We're always going to have to teach that. It's not going to go away. It's not going anywhere. This is part of our animal heritage.
And that's what I think about cause and effect too, because I mean we know in quantum mechanics, as you were saying, in the current held model, there are causes without effects. Radioactive decay is a cause without effect. The information doesn't even exist until the decay actually occurs. Or
You mean effects without a cause?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's effect without a cause, because as Rumpus knows, they tried the hidden variable model. It didn't work. There's some kind of variable that we weren't aware of, and that was what was causing something to decay at a specific time or something to fuse spontaneously at a specific time. And that didn't work for some very complicated reasons that I'm not even aware of. But the current held model is now that there's nothing in the system prior to the event. It literally is an event without a causation. And yeah, I think subconsciously we have a hard time thinking about that because we're so intuitively thinking whenever we've seen something happen that something caused it. But in quantum mechanics, that's just so strange to our normal everyday life because things that happen at the quantum level that we're not used to.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be safer to say? Wouldn't it be safer to say that you just don't know the cause as yet, as to saying, there is no cause?
Right. So I think this actually does answer my question because when I was bringing up the causality, I was thinking of criteria 3 that Ozzy was laying out. Denying them results in irrationality or a kind of madness or at the very least a performative contradiction. I think in terms of how it was laid out, what the scientific image can do is not dispense with properly basic beliefs, but only or that they exist, but only dispense with what it is in fact we consider a properly basic belief. So the scientific image might dispense with causality as properly basic and a result of the primitive brain, but it can inform us of probably a better way to think of the relations between things on both the micro and the macroscopic level.
Yes, I'd agree with that, yeah.
Right, but at this point it kind of seems like it's breaking into a type of coherentism as opposed to a foundationalism, because you have on the one hand things you're building up from the foundation, that is science, but on the other hand, once it's built up, it can go back and kind of augment what we first started with. So it seems to be operating more like the web as opposed to the foundation at this point, at least what I'm getting from this discussion.
Yeah, well, welcome to Foundherentism.
Is that
the ugly fusion between foundationalism and coherentism is Foundherentism, and I guess that's where I sit.
Right, yeah, I see.
Rather
okay.
But anyway, listen, I have to get going, but there's some people who've been waiting to ask a question. Hypatia has a question.
Can Hypatia ask a quick question real quick before you go? Although I don't know if she even has a quick question.
Well, I mean, quick or not, I mean, I'd love to hear a question. So.
Well, I had several questions, but I guess if there's not that much time, I can only ask one of the minor ones.
We'll see.
It was in relation to this thing about causation, because, and I think Eddie was probably getting into it. I think you had given 5 conditions for what you regard as being constitutive of a properly basic belief, which were, again, something's being an unstated assumption of some sort, being universally held, that denial results in irrationality, that they're undefendable except on pain of circularity, and also they're irrevisable. And among the examples you included with respect to satisfying those 5 conditions were the belief that one has a self, or the belief that causes and effects exist, for example. And what I guess I wasn't entirely clear on is when you're including those as examples of properly basic beliefs, what do you mean by causation and a self there? Like with respect to causation, are you talking about some type of view where a cause has some type of necessary connection to its effect, as opposed to just some type of constant conjunction, as Hume thought of it?
No, I'm talking about something stronger. I think that the intuition that we have of causation is the necessary connection. I think Hume properly called that into question, and that's why I think it's an unwarranted assumption, right? I mean, but for Hume, I would have thought it was perfectly warranted and intuitively obvious and practically self-evident truth.
But you're counting it as a properly basic belief according to your definition, though, right? I mean, so wouldn't it be irrevisable, or are you saying that? Because I mean, Hume revised according to his conception what causality could consist in, and also he revised what he saw. I mean, he wasn't the only one to do this. I mean, Berkeley had a very similar view as to sort of a bundle theory of the self, which is that this robust conception of the self didn't really exist. You just have just a bundle of sensations. So they appeared to get away with doing that without lapsing into madness or the other conditions that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And the same, I think, could be said for external world skepticism with respect to your, well, I don't know about external world skepticism, other mind skepticism.
I think other minds, a case against me can be made on other minds. That's something I need to work on, actually. With respect to causation, though, I think it's, the necessary connection idea is something that I think we are deeply committed to. But I think the reason we are committed to mental causation to causation, the concept of causation has to do with mental causation. Okay, forget billiard balls. So an object out there hits another object out there, and there's some essential connection between the fact that billiard ball A hit billiard ball B that causes B to move. Part of the idea of cause and effect is that causes bring about their effects. That the cause is sufficient for the effect, and but for the cause, the effect wouldn't have happened, and so forth. So we have this intuition that there's something necessary going on there, causally speaking. But Hume has sort of shown that, wait a minute, where is this coming from? But I don't think Hume has actually shown that there's nothing to this concept. He's just shown that we're not able to point to what the connection is. We don't see the connection. We just infer this connection. Yeah, that's my point. We just infer this connection. We just overlay. There are just these constant conjunctions, right, in time and space. A happens before B, and it always happens. A always happens before B, and we never see B without A, and so forth. And we come to this idea that A causes B. B is the effect of A. Well, maybe it's not like that. Maybe reality is just so constituted that A always happens to B, and A and B are completely unrelated. It's just the way the universe works out. Okay, but it's just a coincidence, and it just is always a coincidence. Okay. And there was never any. I mean, that could be there, but in my view is that we are born thinking that there's an essential connection. But now, the reason I think that we have this, this is going to be controversial, of course. Well, everything is controversial here, but I think this will be especially controversial. But I think that the reason that we think that there's an essential condition between billiard ball causation, okay, is because of something else. So forget about billiard ball causation for a moment. Right? Think about mental causation. I decide to raise my arm, and my arm goes out. Okay, how in the world does that work? Right? Well, who knows how it works exactly? But there's something kind of odd there. There does, in the case of mental causation, seem to be a necessary connection. Right? I don't think a baby flails its arms around and has a certain kind of mental experience and associates a mental experience with its arm going up and then concludes, oh, that's how I make my arm go up. I don't think it works that way. I mean, and think about the first time you ever, or an infant, decided to reach for something or to grasp for something intentionally, right? There's an essential connection there to the extent that the effect was prefigured in the intention, right? Right in the intention in action, but also in the prior intention, right? And so I think that our concept of causation for inanimate objects, I think might be a kind of extrapolation onto the world of a more innate form of causation.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that. I take the Kantian route myself, but my question wasn't so much so that it is, say, innate or anything of that sort, which I can agree with.
But
It
is
just
it
had to
not
do with this.
irreversible?
Yeah, you seem to include it as a properly basic belief. So, given what you were saying, it would presumably be irrevisable. But it seems that
Okay, but I think
there are
we
a number of
haven't
people that have taken to revise it.
I don't think we have revised Hume's. I don't think we have. And I think that all that philosophers have shown is that there's a problem with causation, that we cannot demonstrate the necessary condition. But I think we are all, if you look at how we act, all committed to there being a necessary connection. Nobody acts as if it's a coincidence. Right? Nobody lives that way.
That's
There's a
an
performative
argument against the
contradiction.
view. I mean, that's an argument perhaps against the view, but I was just thinking that, I mean, you could make the argument that Hume himself, and I think that there's some plausibility to interpreting Hume that way, as some type of non-skeptical realist. I'm sorry, as a skeptical realist, which is that he thought you couldn't demonstrate that these things were true, but I mean, he wasn't arguing that they were false necessarily. But I think there are a number of philosophers who would argue that causation, because of some of the considerations Hume brings to bear, that the concept of causation itself is suspect. That the very idea of a necessary connection is not just merely something we can't demonstrate, but it's something that doesn't even make sense.
But how is this different from any of the others? How is this different than any of the other cases that I give? Because all of the others, I think, are subject to doubt. I mean, all of them. Everything that I listed in my list of properly basic beliefs is subject to doubt, has been called into question. I mean, none of them have been. I mean, they've all been sort of revised. So just like the concept of causation has been revised, our concept of truth. I mean, most people, I think, are committed to a very naive correspondence theory of truth. I myself subscribe to a correspondence theory of truth, even though that theory is just replete with problems, right? But I think that concept of truth, as ill-formed as it might be, comes closest to what we're all thinking and talking about, and everything that we presuppose every minute of our waking lives. And that's why I'm committed to it, is that that concept of truth, whatever problems there are with it, is descriptively accurate, right? Semantically, it's what we're talking about. And same thing with a concept of truth anchored in a commitment to necessary connection, I think, is what we're talking about when we're talking about causation, right? I mean, it's, you know, I could be proven wrong. Maybe we will come up with a robust theory of causation that people actually believe, where they don't sort of, you know, performatively in their actions betray a commitment to necessary connection. But I think if you look at how people act, they actually betray a commitment to a necessary connection between cause and effect. Even though philosophers who've studied this know that doesn't make any damn sense. There's no basis for that, right? I mean, I agree that there's no basis for that, but I think that it's very easy to profess not believing in something, but that's not the same thing as believing that it's false, right? And a lot of people will profess to believe that concept is false, when in fact, if you look at their actions, clearly they believe that it's true, but they know that they don't have a reason for thinking that it's true, right? So that's my view. I mean, it's a cynical view of philosophers, I know, but.
So when you're talking about irrevisability, you said that there were that these were the sorts of beliefs that you couldn't reject except on. There are no grounds to reject them.
Yeah, that's what I mean by irrevisability. That's what I mean by irrevisability. Is we can't reject them. We don't reject them. In fact, we don't have anything better to replace them, so we don't reject them. It's not. I don't mean revise in the sense that we can't tinker with it, because clearly we do.
Well, I just mean, like, with respect to these individuals who say reject a, you know, like some type of view where causes bear a necessary connection to their effects and adopt some other view, or someone who, say, rejects, I don't know, takes a different view on the nature of truth, like they take a deflationary view on truth, or or maybe they don't think truth and falsity involves representing the world at all, or anything of that sort.
Yeah.
When they're engaging in that, you're not. That isn't what you're considering to be a case of them revising their notion of truth, the self, causation, and so forth. So it wouldn't be a counterexample to what your criterion is.
Well, I could be talked out of that one, but my hunch is that no, it's not. And for a comparable reason, I don't see anyone behaving with, including philosophers, who have, stated, deflationary theories of truth and other theories of truth, coherence theories of truth, and I don't see them living and acting any differently anywhere. I mean, there is literally no pragmatic difference in how they live in the world. The only difference is in how they talk about truth. That's it. But for that, I can't see how these philosophical positions ground out in anything that matters. These are theories. There are some philosophical positions that I think are unconnected to the rest of the machinery in their belief set. They're just not doing any work, and so it's exactly as if they believed in sort of the full-blooded naive view of truth that most of us assumed growing up without ever having articulated to ourselves. So I think that I think some philosophical positions are just like a wheel. It's supposed to be a gear where there's just no little sprockets on it, or whatever you call those things, on a gear, and it's not turning or doing anything in the machinery at all. There are some respects in which philosophical position A and philosophical position B on a certain subject differ only in how they talk about that subject and nothing else. And so I don't think that qualifies as a revision of the concept, because that is a belief that has no levers on behavior, right? It's completely unimportant. That hardly qualifies as a belief. But that's in part because I think of beliefs as dispositional in character, and they have to ground out in dispositions in behavior other than merely dispositions to say certain things.
So when you say that these are the sorts of beliefs that are irrevisable, are you just saying that there would be some type of performative contradiction involved in professing them?
That's right.
Or,
that's right. Yeah.
I mean, is that all that you're saying? That's what I'm wondering. Or is there more to it?
Well, that's a good question. Is that all I'm saying? It is. I'm certainly saying at least that. Am I saying more than that? That's my test. Okay. Well, let me. Okay, I'm gonna have to think about that. But I think I'm saying at least that it's a performative contradiction.
Okay.
And I think I might be saying more. But see, the reason I'm hesitant is because I think there would be items on the list where I think I could say more, and then there are items on the list where I think, well, no, all I can point to is a performative contradiction and nothing more, right? And I think performative contradictions are actually important. I think that everyone sort of said that what matters is how you behave. That's always more indicative of what you believe. Well, there are performance failures. You can in fact believe something and fail to live up to a certain ideal or standard. Right? I mean, think of morality.
Sure.
I mean, right? So
the reason I was bringing it up was because I'm just trying to get a handle on why you think these are different constraints. Because if it just comes, well, I don't know if it just comes down to it, but if it at least comes down to it being a performative contradiction if one denied them, is that just a consequence of, or in some sense, a rearticulation of the point that denying them results in irrationality or madness in some fashion?
Well, let me say a little bit about irrationality or madness, and then maybe I can interpret your question better, because I can think a couple of ways to go here. When I talk about irrationality or madness, I mean that in two senses. That we would just think a person was daft and crazy, maybe even lock them up, right? I mean, if a person didn't trust in induction, and you just saw them making the same mistake or if they didn't believe in cause and effect, they literally didn't believe that causes had effects, for instance. Okay, never mind the nature of causality, but if they just didn't believe that their actions would have certain effects or something like that, I mean, those people would be a danger to themselves and everyone around them, right? We would have to lock them up for their own safety, if not for the safety of everybody else. Okay, but I think that the deeper problem, and the reason I think it's ingredient in that I'm making these beliefs, these basic beliefs as properly basic, is because they're ingredient in rationality, in the sense that if people do not live and act as if they believe these things, okay, then we will not be able to even ascribe intentional content to them. Their behavior will be inscrutable, right? I mean, imagine if a person said, "There's nothing in my hand," and then I'm not tossing anything back and forth, and you saw me toss this beer glass back and forth or something like that. You think, well, I mean, Ozzy doesn't know the meaning of his own words. What is he talking about? Oh, he's playing a joke, right? But supposing I behaved in ways that seemed rationally incontinent, I said that there's no chair over there, and I proceed to sit on it or something like that, right? And you keep probing me, and you discover that I appear to be sincere in what I'm saying, right? You're going to always cast about to figure out what I'm doing. Is he being sarcastic? Is he telling a joke? Is there something wrong with his vision? Like, what is going? Like, you would keep casting about for a way to make sense of my actions and the words coming out of my mouth, because I don't appear to be acting in a way that is consistent with rationality at all. You would not be able to ascribe intentional content. You would be at a loss. This is really what we do. We diagnose people as crazy when we come to a failure to ascribe intentional content. When we cannot figure out what the heck is going on, what are they seeing, what are they thinking, how are they reasoning, and we think that we're at a loss, right? We think something has broken down in the engine of the mind. Something has fallen apart, and so it's in that sense that I think that certain beliefs are properly basic. When people don't believe things and act as if they don't believe these things, when they perform in ways that contradict a commitment to these beliefs, then we go, something's wrong with this person. This person is either stupid, or we call them irrational, or we say they're mad. The architecture of their thinking is just messed up or something like that. So could you re-articulate your question again, just with that in mind?
So what I was asking, because I mean, right now all I'm just trying to do is just understand how each of the criteria that you had mentioned ties together. So the question I asked, like, to follow up on this bit about irrevisability, which you seem to be pushing it towards this point about it consisting at least in part of being a performative contradiction if one denied these sorts of beliefs. If that was just a fallout or a re-articulation of the point that denying these sorts of beliefs results in irrationality or madness, right? So to the extent that one isn't irrational or mad, then there would be a performative, I mean, it would seem to follow out as a consequence that there would be a performative contradiction if one did deny them. So I'm just wondering if your fifth condition is independent of your third condition, or if it's just a consequence.
I see. Right. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I don't know. In a way, I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. I don't know that one is a consequence of the other. I think, one almost constitutes the other. So, I don't know. That's a good one. I'd have to think about that.
And just one last question before you have to go, just as a quick bit of clarification. I mean, there's more questions I'd like to ask you, but we only have so much time, unfortunately. Which was if you could just quickly clarify what it is. You clarified what you meant by causation when you said causation.
Oh, wait, no, hang on a second. Wait, sorry, can I cut you off? Because, like, you're talking about the fourth and fifth conditions, that it's a condition of rationality and the irrevisability. The irrevisability, I think, is actually different. They're irrevisable for two reasons. They're irrevisable because, in fact, people, for the reasons of performative contradiction, but they're irrevisable for an independent reason that has to do with circularity. And there's a lot of these things that we can't revise just because you would have, in the act of evaluating them, you would have to use the very thing in question, right? So I mean, how in the world are you going to evaluate whether or not you should trust in deduction? What the heck are you going to use? You know, you're going to use some kind of system of deduction. We don't have another system of deduction that we're going to use to evaluate. I mean, how do you evaluate modus ponens, right? If, A implies B, A therefore B. What argument are you going to use to evaluate whether or not that you could trust in the reliability of that inferential practice, right? So there's a problem of circularity. There's a problem of circularity in the case of the reliability of your trusting in the reliability of your senses and trusting in the reliability of your memory. So they're irrevisable for that reason as well. The grounds for revising them are absent, not just the performative one, but the performative one is the independent one. But actually, it's interesting that you mentioned this, point this out to me, because I don't think I've ever had to articulate this to anybody. But if you go through my list, some of them are going to suffer from the circularity problem in a very obvious way. Some of them will suffer from a justificatory circularity problem in subtle ways, and some of them, it's not clear that they will at all. And then the sort of the performative failure will sort of come to the rescue there and qualify it. So it's not entirely clear to me that all of the things in my list of properly basic beliefs satisfy all of the conditions. Some of them I think satisfy, well, all of them I think satisfy 4 conditions. Some of them satisfy 5 conditions. And there are other things that I didn't list as properly basic. I don't want to get into the reasons why I haven't listed those, but that I think would satisfy 4 or 5. So.
Right, and I guess just as a quick bit of clarification from you, if I could get, was you had clarified like what sense of causation that you thought was basic, this sort of necessary connection type of causation, this robust type of causation. And when you were talking about a belief in a self being basic, were you talking about some robust notion of a persisting subject through time, or that type of view?
Yeah, nothing like a soul that will exist, for all time or anything like that. But the idea that, the transcendental unity of apperception, something in Kantian terms. Well, you're Kantian in some respects, so you maybe appreciate that. But I mean, I don't experience. There's this whole perceptual manifold that happens, right? When I'm sitting here in this room, I'm looking. I see my laptop. I also feel my body in this chair. I'm hearing some ambient noise around me and stuff like that. I'm hearing the sound of my own voice as I speak. I don't have to I don't experience these as sort of disparate experiences that I then have to consciously put together. It all feels like it's all happening right here, right now, to me, all at once. This is all happening in the plumbing in my brain somehow. But I don't just feel unified in the sense of that all my sense experiences are happening together and are coordinated, and it's one unified experience, not a set of discrete, unconnected experiences. But I also experience myself as a person, as Ozzy, as having a personality with memories. I understand that my own situatedness in the world, not just my body position, for instance, but why I'm here and my objective and purposes for being here, and I am connecting my being here to a whole set of other actions in the past where I have talked about these kinds of subjects, and I see this particular experience and the words coming out of my mouth now as part of a larger project of trying to articulate a certain view to most of my fellow atheists out there, and so that is one big self, through time, not a simple bundle of impressions or perceptions or something like that. So I see myself as a body existing in time and space, having memories with a persisting personality, all full of unified experiences. Sort of that sort of, again, that full robust sense of self and personal identity. And how that's constituted, who the hell knows? It's
Right.
I think that we're all
I
think everyone's
I mean, it is something pretty innate, I suppose. It's certainly intuitive, at any rate.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a theory that anyone's come up with. I don't think no one ever had to be taught this. I don't think this is an artifact of cultural transmission, this sense of self. I think it's just part of being a human being. Nobody has sort of difficulty distinguishing between myself and some other person, or myself and where my body ends and where the armrest in this chair begins and stuff like that. Like, nobody has these kinds of problems, right? So there are cultural overlays on top of that sense of self and personal identity. Like, culture sort of throws on a whole bunch of stuff. Like, who knows how much of a role culture plays in the sense of gender identity, for instance, right? Or racial identity, or political identity, or national identity, and all of these things. Obviously, those culture plays huge roles in those sorts of things. But I think that there is a raw sense of being me, and it is absolutely innate. It's not taught. It's not learned. It's learned only in the sense that you sort of maybe learn to walk, but no one has to teach you how to walk. It's just this innate capacity that develops.
Well, you learn the words to express it at any rate. In some, maybe that's the only sense in which it's learned.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, the fact that something. Okay, this is kind of weird. Like, there's a difference between something that has to be taught and something that is something that is learned and something that is innate. But innate doesn't mean that you were born with it. Like I don't think I was born with a sense and personality and an understanding of causality and stuff like that, and a commitment to to the concept of truth and induction, all that, from when I was conceived. Obviously, certain things had to be in place, right? Certain things had to be acquired, and just as we say that language ability is innate, right, and requires some cultural input, right? Certain other things like walking, I don't think are. You don't have to be taught to walk. I mean, parents are always sort of taking their toddlers around and holding them by the hands and trying to coax them into walk earlier than they probably can. But none of that is necessary.
I think you've got an innate logical processing system, just like you've got innate. I mean, your genes have directed your neurological network to form a network that can deal with logic, deal with language, process information, have memories and stuff like that. I think you are innately, through the programming of your genes, have a lot of innate properties.
Right, but innate doesn't mean you're born with it. Something can be innate and acquired later. I mean, puberty is innate. I'm innately male. Okay, well, well, you could say, well, I was born male, but I wasn't born a fully functioning male. I mean, at some point, puberty kicks in, right, and certain things start to happen, right,
Well, I think you were born with it.
There's a certain sense in which every woman was born a woman, but she wasn't born a woman literally. She was born female, and she becomes a woman. But that wasn't. But her womanhood, right, the ability to menstruate and reproduce, for instance, those are aspects of womanhood that I think are obviously innate, but you're not born with them. Just to say that it's something.
You mean just in the sense of time, you've got the program to acquire the properties, but you're not actually don't have the properties at the point of being born.
Right, right. Some things just come online later, but they're innate in the sense that you were born with that capacity, and you didn't have to learn anything to acquire that capacity. No one had to teach you how to walk. You would have walked even if no one had.
But I think you also didn't need to be taught how to have logic either. I think that is something that's also programmed into you. That's innate as well. You might not have it when you were born, but you've got the program that will mean you'll develop that capacity.
Yeah, well, that one's a little more complicated because I think that one's a little bit more like language. Everyone is born with capacity for language, but you have to be exposed to it. You have to be exposed to people talking, and then you will acquire whatever language people are talking around you. No one has to try to teach you. You don't need to teach your children language, really. You just talk around them, and there's a certain critical window where if they're exposed to language, they will pick it up.
Okay, you've got the properties that enable you to learn a language. That's innate.
That's right. Right. And now in the case of logic, I think that there's a kind of primitive, certain kind of primitive, non-conscious, non-propositional inferential practice that goes on. I think that people sort of are able to do modus ponens even if they're not able to think through the propositions, possibly. But in any case, most of logic is acquired, and much of it is learned.
Through meeting reality. Okay, yes, but you've got in other words, you're born with the tools innately to learn, to experience reality.
You're born with a capacity. You're born with a capacity. You're not, but you're not born with the expressed ability.
Yes, you then need to. Reality needs to interact with you, which you can then. You're receptive to reality then, and then being able to draw conclusions. Yes.
So, right.
But wouldn't that prove? But wouldn't that prove that reality actually exists? If you really think about it, I
Well,
mean,
reality
independent of your senses.
Well, reality exists by definition. Reality just means that which exists. So,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
but one thing to add, I think one of the best logicians to look at for how people think, is Aristotle. Funny enough, and there's this fantastic book called uh, what is it? An Aristotelian Account of Induction, Creating Something from Nothing by a Canadian philosopher known as Louis Groark. And he documented this quite nicely. Aristotle, as a biologist, in a very primitive sense of the term, wasn't someone who was interested just in how we ought to think, but how humans do in fact think. And he described two processes about induction and deduction. One was going from the particular observances to the universal, which is induction, and the deduction was going from the universal belief down to the particular and what to ascribe to it. And in doing so, this is how we kind of got our first very early formulations of logical thinking. Not because they were designed in a very intricate way like we see modern logic and probability systems. Bayesianism, nobody is a Bayesian. Nobody thinks in Bayesian terms. If you look at how computers think who have Bayesian programs, when a primary belief, for example, is discarded, so are auxiliary beliefs developed through it. However, if you look at how human beings think, once you have a belief that you get rid of, that you still have lingering beliefs that hold on even after they're gone. Human beings don't think like computers. Aristotle himself was interesting enough that his systems of logic were fairly simple, syllogistic. They were easy to maneuver around. It wasn't until much later where they became far more mathematical, thanks to guys such as Frege and of course later on Bertrand Russell. And I think it really speaks to the point about how human beings have a very primitive sense of logic where we just use it, as a way to just jump from simple premise to premise through, building kind of universal statements and ideas and applying them in particular states. It's like if I was to say all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is immortal, already in the first premise contains what I'm going to believe in the conclusion, and my idea of what mortalhood, what being a man entails. It's part of the definition. A is B, for example, and this is really an interesting way of how human beings think in terms of the terminology. Whereas later on we go to propositions, facts that can be rendered more true or false, and that sort of thing, or states of affairs. And I think this is really more speaking to the point, because if we look at human reasoning from the point and perspective of psychology, we really get to not just how we ought to think, but just in terms of how we do in fact think, and where we can improve just as the thinking creatures we are. Sorry for repeating myself a few times there.
Sorry, thanks.
Yeah, Ozzy unfortunately has to get going here, so I'm gonna let him do a quick summation, and then I want to thank him for coming in and donating his time. This is really fun. I mean, these kind of hangouts are the ones that I really enjoy the most. I get to kind of just sit back and listen. They take a minimal amount of moderating, obviously. I'm finding them to be fascinating, and there's a lot of topics about philosophy that I do want to kind of go down that path and learn more about. They seem to be very popular with people, so I think that we'll definitely be doing that. I'm hoping that people, go to my Patreon and even like $1 a month. It all helps to get things like this going, where we make even presentations and have people do formal presentations on certain topics. I think it'd be really interesting. But anyway, I'm gonna let Ozzy kind of like sum up what he was saying. I am gonna be posting like the 5 things Ozzy was talking about. Hopefully they haven't gone away in the slideshow. Let me look before people have asked for those. Can you post them again, Hypatia, when you get a chance?
Yeah, I have a little write-up I can.
Okay, yeah, just, you know what, send it to me, and then I'll repost it on my channel, because people did ask about that. But go ahead and give us a summation, Ozzy, because I think that was wonderful so far.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Well, I didn't want to. I don't want to repeat everything that I said before, but everybody has a worldview, and a worldview is just the set of your beliefs, and that's one way of understanding a worldview. That's how I understand it. But there are beliefs, and then there are beliefs. Some of our beliefs rest on other beliefs that we have, and the beliefs that are sort of at the very bottom, that everything else seems to rest on and is plugged into. Those are the ones we call our basic beliefs. And some beliefs, some basic beliefs can be revised and abandoned and rejected and replaced with something else. I was a believer myself in God, and believe me, my belief in God was plugged into everything. It was plugged into my sense of meaning and purpose and value in life. It was plugged into all of my moral calculations. It was absolutely fundamental to my outlook on life. All of my values, pretty much. And I would have thought this is absolutely basic, and it couldn't be dispensed with. And of course, I eventually tumbled out of my faith and no longer believe that, and I'm still able to go along. So I think that belief is that belief in a God that I held was not properly basic. It wasn't sort of an indispensable one. It wasn't special. It was just a belief like if I believed that the Earth was flat, or if I believed that there was, that I don't know, any other belief that I have that turns out to be false as I see it and that I reject. Okay. But there are other beliefs that are, I think, different. They're in a separate class, and these beliefs, I think, belong in a separate class. They are properly basic. They're not just basic beliefs that can come and go. They are properly basic and belong in a special class for the reasons, for the 5 criteria that I gave, and those are that they're essentially unstated assumptions. They're not learned. They're universal. Everyone has them. There are ingredients to rationality and reasonable to a degree that we would consider a person as irrational or out of their heads if they didn't exhibit a belief in them. We can't defend these particular beliefs. They're so fundamental they don't rest on anything else. They're not derivable. You can't defend them except on pain of circularity. And lastly, for all of the reasons above, they're irrevisable. We don't know how to reject them. And that doesn't mean that they're true. That doesn't mean that you can't call them into question. And we should. Any good skeptic should call these beliefs into question. The very things that you're most committed to, that are most fundamental, that are most sacred to you, that you think are most likely rock solid, those are the very things that a good skeptic is going to examine and question. And I think that these can be denied without contradiction, but I think no one, in fact, actually does go through life denying them and living as if they're false. Although you can doubt their veracity, as I do. I doubt their veracity. But I nevertheless live as though I'm committed to them. And so these are essentially unwarranted and unwarrantable. They are faith commitments, and we shouldn't be allergic to the word faith. These are presuppositions, but these are the presuppositions that ground rationality. They're at the very bottom of rationality. They make up the ladder of reason that we climb when we want to arrive and reach other beliefs. Okay, it is through these properly basic beliefs that we're able to acquire and reject and revise everything else in our belief set. These are the principles that are constitutive of rationality and reasonableness. And so, accepting and acknowledging the fact that yes, I believe these things, we're committed to these things, and I can't warrant them, is not a license to believe any old damn thing. And you don't have to worry that if you acknowledge that, hey, I have some unwarranted and unwarrantable presuppositions, you don't have to worry that you're licensing anybody else to believe anything else. It simply doesn't work that way. These things are in a special category by themselves, but they're not in that special category because they're true. They're in that special category for the reasons that I gave. Anyway, that's all I have to say on that for now. Thank you very much.
It's so funny. I get so lambasted when I say that word faith, and I think it was like J.D. Kane. Was it J.D. Kane? I don't know. Some people were like, no, we need to avoid that word faith, and I'm like, I don't have a problem with it. And I'm not sure if you do either. I thought someone was saying that you don't, but I'm not that sure. But I don't have a problem with the word.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the word faith. I mean, I'm using the word faith in the disparaging term here. I'm using the word. No, it's not just confidence. It's because I have warranted confidence and unwarranted confidence, and I think my confidence in these things is unwarranted. I can't warrant it rationally. I can only try. As soon as I try to warrant these properly basic beliefs, I end up violating some epistemological norm, like by arguing in a circle or something like that, right? And
I mean, like, it's what if you have faith in somebody?
Actually, confidence does come from faith.
Well, no, but I don't mean linguistically. I don't.
I know. I'm just.
Okay.
I don't want to play that genetic fallacy with.
Okay.
I know. I'm just being a dick.
Yeah. Now, if anyone's wondering what Max is talking about, is the word confidence contains the word fides, which means faith, right? It means faith with or faith in.
God.
So that's where the word confidence comes from, the word faith.
Bloody hell.
But anyway, no. I think it's okay to use the word faith, and we shouldn't be terrified of it. But just because
you should. When surrounded by evangelists, you should be.
Yeah, no. You have to be prudent. You have to be prudent. But what you shouldn't do is pretend that you don't believe anything, that you never believe anything on faith. That, I think, is a mistake.
Unreasonable.
It is completely unreasonable. It's completely indefensible, and you're going to get tripped up if you're talking to someone who knows a little bit on the subject. You're going to end up looking kind of foolish, right? This idea of
I accept certain things on faith.
What's that?
I don't have an issue with it because it doesn't mean some kind of metaphysical, spiritual thing. It just means I accept on faith that I can't justify it, and I know I can't.
Yeah, well, I think look. If skepticism is worth anything, it means being intellectually honest and being intellectually modest and acknowledging our epistemological limits, what we can show and what we can't show. And a lot of what we can show rests on assumptions that we can't show to be true. Them's the facts as I see them. So, anyway,
I say it's inevitable that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I am going to bid Ozzy farewell. I'm going to keep this open a little bit so we can discuss some things that he's talked about and horribly butcher them like we usually do.
Yeah.
I don't.
Let's misrepresent Ozzy.
Thank you, Ozzy.
You're very welcome. Thank you. This was really nice. I appreciate everyone sort of indulging me.
And we're going to be talking about it. So.
Okay. Well, I'll try to listen in. I got to have supper. So. Okay.
Go ahead.
Good night.
Helen, I know you got here late and already chastised you for it. Okay, but what do you think so far? I mean, what do you think of what he was saying? I know you agree with most of the things, anyways, but.
Yeah, I do, and he kind of touched on one of the things I was wondering about with this so-called coherentism, and he has this mixed solution, so I like it.
Yeah, I mean. I'm just getting into some of this philosophy, really in-depth philosophy stuff, and I don't know the difference between like Hume and Kant and Kierkegaard very well. I mean, I understand the basics, but you guys talk about it on a whole different level. I mean, when you and Max and Hypatia and Ozzy get together or something, it's just like, yeah. Now I know what you guys feel like when like Muppets and I start talking about science. It's like,
So the biggest difference between the two is this: Immanuel Kant was a real pissant who wasn't very stable, while David Hume can outconsume Schopenhauer and Hegel.
Didn't Schopenhauer have a lot to say about him? And they kind of were like bitter enemies, weren't they?
Hold on, Max is making a big joke there.
I don't get it.
Monty Python reference.
It's a Monty Python quote.
Oh.
Of course, it's the Brit who gets the Monty Python reference.
I would assume. I like Monty Python, but I mean, I like the Holy Grail and.
Schopenhauer and Hegel, yeah, they really did not like each other. I'm not too familiar with their feud, like what exactly Schopenhauer hated about Hegel, but I do know that that is a point of history.
I'll have to ask Dionysius because he just loves Schopenhauer.
I mean,
you can't go a hangout without mentioning Schopenhauer or Skinner.
I mean, someone like Wittgenstein. I mean, he basically denied his earlier work. I mean, philosophers spend a lot of time, because they don't have to measure what they do and speculate about against reality a lot of the time, they can end up talking bollocks, as far as I'm concerned, and then even the person who's offered the bollocks can actually suddenly say, like Wittgenstein said, oh dear, I was talking bollocks. Without something like physics and chemistry, you can't actually go and test it against reality. Unfortunately, with philosophy, a lot of the time you can't. That means you end up with arguments about angels on pins and things.
Well, that's one thing I do like about it, right? That, I mean, it's not so rigid where you can't kind of
You
like
can make stuff up, yeah.
it's all the mind, right? I mean, there's so many things that we think about. You know, how do we come up with a coherent epistemological model? How do we know what is true? How do we know what is knowledge? Science can't answer those kind of questions. It's not designed to. So you have to have some kind of other branch.
Actually, by Rumpus's standard, theology is actually better than philosophy because at least with theology, you could go up against the Bible and check it out. Where it's not reality, but at least you could go up to the Bible. Whereas philosophy doesn't even have that much going on for it.
I don't know if anybody says they're a scientism, false scientism. It's probably more Rumpus than anybody else. There's a few others in our community that just don't think much of philosophy, but he's definitely one of them.
Although to be fair, I think it is the mark of a good mind that one can look at all your past beliefs, what you worked up for, and call that into question. I mean, aren't there scientists who still haven't abandoned their pet theories because better scientists have shown those to be bullocks?
Yeah. I mean, Einstein was the classic one in that case. He didn't accept quantum mechanics, although some people claim he did at the very end, but I don't think he did. He certainly didn't accept.
I think he did. He just didn't like.
Yeah, I know you keep on saying he did, and I'm sure I've read that. I read that there's a marvelous book about his arguments with Bohr, and I don't remember reading in it that he did really come to grips with quantum mechanics even towards the end. I might be wrong about that, but I didn't think he did. But the point is, he's an example certainly for most of his life, even if it was at the very end. Certainly for most of his life, he rejected quantum mechanics, and he's been shown to be wrong.
B.F. Skinner was another scientist, mostly in psychology, who was like that as well. After Noam Chomsky bent him over a table.
He talks a load of bollocks.
Chomsky?
Or? Oh, God, mad bollocks that guy spews.
I mean, I really dislike his political viewpoints, but in terms
Not
of
just that, no, his philosophy, everything he ever says. Every time I see him on the telly, just like Searle. I mean, Searle, I haven't seen on the telly for a good few years now, but whenever Chomsky comes on, I always think he's talking bollocks at me.
You should probably give me a list of people you do like. Because
yes, I should try.
No, it's very
I should try actually. It's probably because even someone like Dirac, who I like, who was responsible for the relativistic form of some quantum mechanical equations, he went a bit bollocksy. It's very perhaps no one actually. Yes, it's just the body. That's why science is all peer review, and everybody may be an expert in one area, but they'd say something else that's stupid, and then it's actually the body of science is the only thing that you can really have any regard for. Individuals always cock things up in one way or another.
Do you remember that famous photo? I don't know if I'm sure you've seen it, Rumpus, where they had like all the great minds. It was like 1927.
It was the about three of them.
And Einstein and Du Bois,
Heisenberg,
and I mean all of them. It was like holy crap. I mean this is like the dream team, right?
Yeah. And that's when they decided all the science seemed to be going bonkers. They couldn't work out what the hell was going on. They had all these strange results they couldn't explain. And I think it was somewhere in Belgium, something conference they had about 3 years in a row, and they said we've got to sort this out. And they all came together, and actually through those 3 conferences over a period of about 3 years, they actually did basically sort out the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, even though Einstein was against the conclusions, but he basically accepted them because everybody else said that he was wrong, and they all came up with some coherent theory, and he had to accept it basically. Things like Heisenberg and Dirac were just awesome in those days, and Einstein just had to give way.
Yeah, I'm going to bring this to a close. I know Max had to go to work. Helena has to go, and Helena, you could be late anytime. You're absolutely forgiven.
She gets a pass.
But I telling Helena what I was kind of like wanting to go with my channel. And I don't know if you're being facetious or not. I mean, did you like what I was saying about the direction I want to take my channel? I think you were not kidding.
No, I thought your description was really good.
Good, because I mean, I am trying.
It's just you stole Helena's idea of her channel. That's all she's saying, I think.
Oh, did I steal your?
It is, but he didn't. No. If you read it, it's not at all. It's really good.
Okay.
I mean, if Helena wants, I mean, I figured we could like divvy it up like this a little bit. Like, I know, Nadia does all the political LBGT and all that kind of like really brazen, diversified type stuff. People, really
I wanted to do sort of philosophy for non-philosophers.
You can have like some of the philosophy and logic stuff because I love the Alec Malpass things you did with him with the logic. Those were just fucking amazing. I was so. I want to do more of the science, but I do want to dwell on the philosophy a little bit. But I'm really trying to grow my channel, and it's just difficult. I'm not that familiar with the process of how to make the stuff actually get bigger. I mean, you see these people out there with thousands of subscribers, and I like to have good content. I like to have good hangouts like this. I know I have people. I've literally in the last month had probably 20 people, maybe more, literally that I've never even talked to ever, message me and say they listen to my hangouts. I got 50 people. I've only got like 10 maybe in the side chat, so I figure that probably the vast majority of the viewers never even come into my hangouts, never even go on the live feed. I don't know their names because they don't chat in the live feed. So I know there's a lot of listeners that like listening to these types of hangouts, and a couple of them have.
Or they like the drama. It could find it all drops off when you do more presentations and less drama.
No, actually, it's the opposite. The drama gets about 60 to 80 views. This one got about 50, which is really, really good. But the one I did on polonium halos, yeah, that's probably one of my lower videos. The ones we did on math, the lowest by far. But that's okay. I mean, I still got to provide informational, educational content. But I am going to be ending this. Helena, thank you for coming in. We are going to have another hangout again on philosophy, Helena and Hypatia. I do want to go over some stuff with Kant because I just was not understanding it, and maybe Hypatia can explain it to us one day.
Yeah, that'd be good. I think, yes, we could do a bit more explaining, couldn't we?
Message me those things after you revise them, Hypatia, and I will post it on my channel with full credit to you. But I think those 5 things, the way you worded them, really kind of hit the nail on the head. Okay?
I'll go ahead and do that.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you very much for listening. Again, I'm going to post my Patreon one more time. I know I'm seeming like I'm hawking this, but I do want to grow my channel, and one way I can do that is have some the fundage to maybe get some software, or at least the time that I invest on this stuff, because it's quite extensive, especially making presentations and coming up with ideas and guests. I'm trying to get, like Stephen Bassett said he would come in. He's a UFO lobbyist. He's been on AM Coast to Coast and Fox TV. I could probably get Ron Tebow. He's been on Fox TV, and I used to talk to all the time. He debunks Lisa Caputo a lot. He has a channel on YouTube if you're not familiar with him. So I am trying to reach out to people and get them as guests. And then Patreons will actually get, the top patrons. They'll get proceeding with the guests. If I have Kent ever come in, like Hovind, I'm thinking of Eric Hovind might come in. Isaiah's trying to set that up. So if you're a Patreon and you're a top Patreon, you'll be able to get into the hangout on that one. You also get full credit on any of my videos. Any video I do, you'll get credit on. So if they go viral, your name will be in there. So there are some reasons to even $1 a month. That's what $1 a month. What's that? It's not to support me. It's just, I think, support the channel. I don't think asking for $1 a month is that bad. I've donated to people before, and when I was in a situation where I could, I'm not now. But I should be starting work here very shortly. I've got numerous things in the works. I have a lot of apps in, and I got a lot of interviews coming up next week. So I probably won't be online too much coming up here. And if I am, it's only going to be on night. But anyways, I'm going to end this hangout. Thank you for my 50 listeners. Let me know what you think of the hangout. Let me know what you have any suggestions. Please comment on the video and like the video. I've got 15 likes now with 50 people watching, so that should go up another 30 here soon. But Odian, Grumpus, Hypatia, Helena, I thank you all, and I will bid you adieu.